So welcome to this loose ink and watercolour sketching tutorial for beginners. And this is boats on a beach. So I'm sure you guys know how much I enjoy sketching boats. One of my favourite things. And as is often the case with my art, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go straight in with the fountain pen. And I'm going to just sketch out these boats. And I'm going to be looking at their shapes and looking at the proportions and how they fit on the page. Before I've put pen to paper, I've already thought about where do I want the edge of this boat to be, how wide do I want it to be on the page, how much space do I need to leave around these boats, because I don't like to go right to the edge of the page quite often. I like to give them, these things a little bit of space. So what are these lines that I'm actually sketching here? Now, if you're a beginner, you might think, well, how do I choose my lines? So here you can see on the original reference drawing, what I'm going to show you is the lines that typically I would choose to draw. Now these lines denote the structure of the boat, so there you can see the wheelhouse, you can see the shape of the hull. They might also denote things like details on the hull, like the fenders, or the boot top, which is like where the waterline of the boat is. The lines also will show details of the rigging, blocks or ropes or things like that. But basically, it's the sort of outside shape that you're trying to denote, as well as any areas that split up those shapes, if that makes sense. So I'll show you a bit later on how what I've drawn here compares to the final drawing. So the reason why this is called loose ink is because the lines are not really too demarcated. It's quite a rough sketch, really, certainly compared to how you could do it if you properly constructed it and things like that. And I'm using a Monteverde fountain pen here with a flex nib, and I'm holding the pen, as you can see, quite far back, and that gives me quite expressive and interesting lines. They're not too specific. Another thing you can see, what I'm trying to do quite often is keep the nib of the pen on the paper as much as possible. So here you can see I'm drawing in the wheelhouse windows, and you can see they're really wonky. I'm not really bothered about that. I think the kind of style is a really interesting thing. Sometimes you can go very angular and you can go very kind of mathematical and quite polygon focused, if that makes sense. Other times you want to be sketchy and just keep it really rough. And I quite like that, actually. I think sometimes for me there's a really nice immediacy in a slightly unfinished kind of feel to a sketch. Now, I know it's not everyone's way of working, and some people see really wonky drawing, but I actually think it's just such a personal thing. Some people really love that style, and at the end of the day, your main critic is you, really, when it comes to your art, because the truth is, and I know it's a harsh pill to swallow, but none of us are really going to make millions with our artwork. So the main reason we do it is because it makes us happy, and that has real benefits for both our mental health and our physical health, because it's a wonderful form of relaxation. We're getting away from scrolling on our phones. We're just having a fantastic time, and that's really what it is all about for me. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to start a YouTube channel, was to share some of that fantastic positivity and the benefits that I got from my artwork, and I also saw a lot of stuff on social media and the news that was just toxic, and either celebrity stuff that I didn't care about, or anyway, it just felt like there's a lot of negativity in the world. So if I could share some positive art news, then even if it was just, this is what I enjoy and you should try it, then at least it felt like I was putting something good out. Anyway, now for a few years of my life I lived in a ship's chandlery, which, if you don't know, doesn't sell candles, it sells boat bits. And we used to sell everything from navigation lights to aerials to all these little bits that I'm drawing in here now. And I think that's one of the reasons why I enjoy sketching boats, is because a lot of the components of a boat, whether it's a pulley or an impeller for a pump, or hatches or wire or rope and whatever, we used to sell. So I'm very familiar with those things, and it kind of gives me a kind of warm, cuddly feeling to actually be drawing them. So this second boat in the background, for all that it could be done as just an outline, because it's not playing a starring role really, it's a little bit further away, and perhaps you wouldn't want to do too much detail because you don't want to take away from the fact that the main guy is here on the left. But nevertheless, I want to still show it with a certain amount of sketchy realism, so I'm going to go in and add in some of that. So one of the things that I know on the reference drawing we have is a few sort of flags on that boat behind. Now I'm adding some of these in here, and this is where I kind of, in retrospect, looking back, I think I would have rather have put the flags on the boat that's in the foreground, perhaps just to the back of the wheelhouse there. I like the flags on that boat, but as I said, I want my main focal viewing to be on the boat in the foreground, and I actually think having those flags on the foreground boat would have probably worked better. So here I'm using that flex nib, which you apply with a bit of pressure, and it can give you some slightly darker lines to denote the edge of that bit of the boat that's closest to us. So the gunnel on the starboard side, there you go, which is closest to the viewer, I just want to make that a little bit more poppy in terms of the line thickness, and that'll help bring it out to the viewer a little bit. So again, just some of those edges under the fenders where you have a bit more shadow, trying to help that along with a slightly thicker line work. So this is very typical of my kind of line and wash process. So don't forget to give that a really good hair dry, or leave it for a little while to dry off before you go and do your painting stage. And here, this is a really fun bit with the watercolour. Now what I'm doing is using this 3/4 inch flat brush. I love these. I rediscovered it recently for skies, and I've got a bit addicted to it, as you tend to with equipment. When you forget you've got something, and then you suddenly see it in a drawer and go, oh, I'll have a play with that. And then it's in your next favourite thing until your next favourite thing comes along. The ADHD, and yeah, not a lot of attention. It's definitely in deficit. So what I'm doing here is I'm working on this Cardi paper, which is one of my favourite types of paper. It's super absorbent. And this is a Cardi sketchbook. I'm just adding in a nice water wash. One of the reasons why I sometimes do this on Cardi paper is because it's so absorbent. It needs a lot of water to actually get like properly saturated. So I sometimes put on a layer of water, and then because I'm feeling bold, I'm using French ultramarine here with a little bit of cobalt blue. This is Daniel Smith's extra fine French ultramarine, so it's not as granulating as some versions. French ultramarine can be quite a heavily granulating pigment. Because the main focus of the image is really the boat on the left hand side, I'm doing some slightly diagonal kind of clouds that go from the top right to the bottom left, if that makes sense. And this is quite typical of my sort of style of clouds. Every time I do it, they're different, and they're just crazy. I try different things every time, and I think skies is the one area where I just don't really give a monkeys. I tend to get quite abstract and wild. Okay, now I've got some hard edges here, so I'm just trying to soften up some of these hard edges, adding in a tiny little bit more pigment. So here I've got an assistant who wants to take part in drawing a little bit. So my little boy's coming over, and he's going to do that fender in quinacridone rose. He's using both hands here. It's been very, very good. So yeah, good job there, lad. So when it comes to actually putting in the ground here, what I've done is I've gone and just used some really pure natural sienna colour there, which is like that yellow ochre you see. And what I've done is then I've used some of my Van Dyke brown. You could use some burnt umber with a little bit of blue in. And that's just to create a sort of slight shadow area under there. And then what I'll do is I'll develop that once I've put in a little bit of the bottom of the boats in, and I might go in and add some splashes and stuff like that. I'm using that flat brush, and I'm just pulling out a little bit of that shadow under the boat at the back, because I just think it got a little bit carried away. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix up some darker colour, and I'm going to add in some dots. So spattering is a technique I use quite a lot. And one of the things you have to keep in mind before you spatter is have some tissue handy, because it can be quite messy. So that's going to get a hair dry now. And we're getting close to the last few stages. So as you can see here, some of that spattering has got a lot softer, and I've mixed up some of this lovely kind of purpley brown colour. It looks quite a fruity colour. It's almost blackcurrant as well. And that's for the underneath of these boats. And that's normally something called anti-foul, which people tend to paint on their boats to stop them getting covered in barnacles and weed and things like that. But I think colour-wise, that blackcurrant, you know, sits beautifully with that cerulean blue. And I'm also using that same colour there to add in some more sort of like shadows under the boat, just because it's easy, because I've got it mixed. And then I'll use something similar actually on the boat behind. On the boat behind, I'm also using that slightly as a shadow colour, just to add a bit more form. And I'm also going to add it on the wheelhouse of this boat in the foreground. It actually works quite well as a bit of a shadow colour. So on the boat in the foreground, I really want to try and get a little bit more depth to that shadow and show a little bit more of the form. So I'm going to add in a little bit more there. I think it helps make that foreground boat pop a little bit. So that's going to get hair dry again, and we're going to come back at... So I've mixed up a tiny bit more there of that purple sort of colour. And I'm going to use that as a sort of shadow colour. So this is a quinacridone rose, a little bit of blue, and a little bit of Van Dyke brown. And that shadow colour is going to go on that side of the wheelhouse. If you look at the boat behind, you can't see a massive hand in the way. But you can see the boat behind here, where the light is coming from. So I'm going to add it on that side of the wheelhouse there. There we go. Fat hand's moved. And I'm also going to add it behind the wheelhouse, where we have a little bit of shadow there on the transom or the stern of the boat. And also a little bit further down, because this boat is this clinker construction where it's made of overlapping strips of probably fur or something. You do get these sort of stripes of shadows on the hull. So it's always worth putting those in as well. So what I'm doing here is just developing this form a little bit, adding in a little bit more pigment. Having a look, having a think. I'm adding in a little bit more of Moonglow, which is a Daniel Smith colour that's actually sort of, it's got different pigments in, and it dries in quite an interesting way, or 20. So one of the final touches here is I've just been looking at this and I'm thinking it needs a little bit more shadow underneath. It doesn't feel quite as balanced now. I've got a little bit more shadow in the boat. So I'm going to go and add a little bit more there underneath the boats. So that's going to have one more hair dry. And then we're back for the finishing touches. That's just come back from the hairdryer. And we're going to do some finishing touches. Now, as I said before, in retrospect, looking at this, I think I put a little bit more detail in that boat at the back. And I should have put a little bit more detail in the boat in the foreground.